Bosses, what did your new employee do that made you instantly regret hiring them? Story 1. I didn't hire them, thankfully, but I did work at a call center with a couple that got hired into different divisions. He went to work in sales and she went into customer service. This isn't all that unusual by itself. What happened next, though? Wow. Their plan from the start was to see how quickly each of them could get let go after they'd started their medical benefits, which kicked in around the 90-day mark. So they were both fairly exemplary. During that time, they both began talking to coworkers in their divisions about their off-work time, internet habits, etc. Eventually, they started canvassing their respective divisions with business cards advertising their adult entertainment site and inviting people to join. Apparently, they did this pretty frequently. Get a job to get medical insurance, then plot to get let go so they could draw unemployment and continue to keep medical insurance going via Cobra. In the meantime, they'd get as many of their doctor and dental visits as they could schedule. Then they'd drum up interest in their adult cam site, because by then they'd have gotten to know a ton of people, and who doesn't want to see the hot girl/guy at the office doing it? They were both very attractive. Even the managers involved in this cluster F of a plan had to admit that all the angles on all this were exceptionally slick. And because Phoenix is rife with call centers, they were able to work their way up and down a certain area of town without any of their respective businesses becoming the wiser. Work for 3 months out of the year, get insurance, then doink on camera for 9 months. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it isn't the worst plan I've ever heard. Maybe not exactly ambitious, but I don't know, I guess live your life? The problem would be when they finally get hired at a call center that just liked it nasty and never fires them. What do you do then? Story 2. I had a new guy to train in my job where we installed TVs and various other electronics in expensive houses. I had a small part in hiring him, and even though he wasn't from our industry, he seemed to have good skills in related fields and seems to be willing to learn what he needed to. Our first weeks were spent finishing up a really nice theater. House was completely finished and it was pleasant, easy, indoor, clean work. Then we moved on to the next job and had to wire the house, which involved crawling through the attic and underneath the floors, pulling new wires. I turned to this guy and told him to take these 5 wires down underneath the house and crawl them to the other side. He looked at me like I had 3 heads and said, "What? No way, I'm not going under there." I was taken aback. This is a huge part of the job, and he had to have known that when he was hired. After a couple minutes of talking to him, it was clear he had no intention of doing any dirty work. He ended up going out and sitting in the work van pouting. I called our manager, and when we drove back to the office at the end of the day, his final check was waiting for him. He was completely stunned and got really upset, trying to blame me as his trainer for setting him up and making him do stuff that no one would ever want to do. I didn't get to see the final encounter myself, but it became the talk of the company for a while. Apparently, he never managed to get it through his head that we all had to do this type of work, and I wasn't singling him out. He blamed me and the company for him losing his job all the way out the door. Apparently, he also tried lying to the unemployment office and got shut down hard when my manager explained why he was let go, and he corroborated it, still assuming that we were in the wrong for asking him to do that type of work. Having worked in the cable industry, I knew plenty of installers, and yeah, that work isn't always pleasant. Those folks work and get dirty when they need to, and they certainly don't keep that crap a secret. How do you get a job where you're putting on coveralls and a tool belt and think, time to stay nice and tidy? Story 3. My mom hired her, but I fired her. Mom needed a website and didn't want to wait for me to set it up. I already had a domain, hosting graphics, and WP themes, so I needed maybe 4 hours of work, but I was busy. She decided to hire some lady to do it. Okay, whatever. I emailed the lady and gave her the login info and FTP access of the stuff. She emails my mom a week later saying I got a broken theme and she'll need to build a new one from scratch. She'll charge hourly, but my mom will get a discount because she understands kids messing up, meaning me. I immediately go in, kill all of her access, and change passwords. I have the next day off and planned on doing it then. Lady emails me a few hours later saying she can't log in or access the materials. Did something happen? I tell her off, let her know I've looked at her resume, and she just stole crap from other people and put her name on it. Seriously, the code comments still showed credit to the actual creators. that I've blocked her completely and that her help is no longer needed. I CC my mom, then call her to explain in more detail. My mom proceeds to be furious with me for being rude to the scam bee until I get her site up and running the next day. Oh look, no broken theme. Mom never apologized, but she also stopped calling out my rude behavior and even seems oddly proud of my assertiveness now. Story 4. Oh, my good buddy Simeon. Got hired right out of school for a basic sales job. 2 weeks in, most of the office is at a convention. I left the office early to finish off the day from home. On me, I'm in tech and could work from home no problem. Should not have left him alone. Day finished out and nothing big happens. Following Monday, security stops me as I'm walking in the building to ask about what we did to this kid after he got caught. Caught doing what? Well, it turns out Simeon decided to take a break after I left for the day. He went and bought a six-pack and broke onto the roof of the building to drink beers and tan. We are in an 11-story building. On either side of us are 15-plus-story buildings. Simeon decided to strip down to his underwear and tan on the roof, drinking beers and smoking joints. Security catches him, he blows smoke in the guard's face and tells him to F off, gets kicked off the property. Remember, none of us in the office heard anything about this. Simeon was sick and had worked from home the rest of that week. Eventually, the building contacted our HR department, and Simeon is given a warning. He is somehow allowed on the property again and is told he has 2 strikes against him now. He had constantly been showing up over an hour late each day. Next day, Simeon shows up at noon for a 9-to-5 job. He calls in first to see if it's okay to come in. He slept through 6 alarms. Managers are sure, come on in. Simeon arrives and is finally fired on the spot. Craziest hire/fire I've ever seen. I can't stand people like that because their crap just makes everyone else's lives harder for the time they are there. When I became a delivery supervisor for the bakery I worked at, the owner of the company hired a guy without involving me after hiring 2 other guys who lasted a day or 2 apiece. And yeah, he was basically like Simeon here. Showed up hours late, which meant I was getting stuck doing all the hardest work at the beginning of the shift. Showed up high one time, which isn't great for a job that involves driving. And eventually no-call no-showed for a few days straight, and I told the boss. He gave her a sob story, and she kept him on. He showed up 2 more days, then was 3 hours late on the 3rd day. It was so much fun. Story 5. I didn't directly hire him, but we once had a new employee shadow me since I was the stock manager, and on day 1, he bragged to me about how much nose candy he had done the night before. The store manager was about 5 feet away, and I simply looked over the new guy's shoulder and shook my head. He was gone soon after. Edit. Didn't expect this to get any attention, so I'll throw in some more context. He wasn't immediately let go because at the time we really needed the seasonal help, but even so, it only took a couple shifts of being late and smelling like pot for him to be dealt with. I used to work retail relatively close to a college town, so it's not unusual to have employees hungover, etc. I just assumed that was the case. Mentioned in small talk that I myself was a little hungover, and he just stops and goes, "Oh dude, let me tell you about this party," and continued to go on his nose candy extravaganza of a night. Throughout the day, he had been making frequent trips to the bathroom and told me it was because his nose kept bleeding. I now knew why. Several months later, he came back to reapply for his old job because the store was under new management. I don't think he realized that I was part of that new management, or he had assumed that I was just cool with it. I wasn't. Dude half-butted his job regardless of the drugs. I also have reason to believe he snuck off on his lunch break to smoke pot. I don't have a problem with it. I'm a bit of a stoner myself, but I just don't bring it to work. Story 6. Not a boss, but guy got hired as my swamper. I used to deliver cabinets in a 1-ton truck throughout the area. Boss says, "Got a good one for you. He's big and strong, seems nice." What a great change from the scrawny 18-year-olds he was usually hiring to help me that would work for 3 days and quit because it was too physically demanding. He starts, first hour, we're driving to the site, he's bragging about the crystal he had done last night. The girl that he had got to kiss him at the club, he's married with a toddler. Second hour, at site, he's asking if I can pick him up for work every day if he gives me $25 a week. Was fair, he didn't live far from the shop. Third hour, he's asking to borrow $100 until payday. I decline and say I never lend money to coworkers. By the end of our 8-hour day, he had gotten lunch, a pack of cigarettes, and promises to pick up/drop off every day. I get it. When you start a new job, sometimes you're short on money. It happens. I've mooched cigarettes off people in my first weeks, too. 2 weeks go by, hasn't paid me a cent for gas, kept promising once he get paid, he'll pay me everything at once. Third week goes by, gets first paycheck, but only for 1 week. Week holdback rules. He gives me $10 and 2 cigarettes from his pack that he just bought himself. Fourth week, tell him if he doesn't pay me the gas money today, he's finding his own rides. He responds by saying, fine, I'll just walk anyways. Next day, 30 minutes late because 6 and 7s wasn't there to pick me up, so I had to walk. I tell the boss to fire this F-head. He does. I've been here for a while at this point. He needs me to be happy. Guy comes to me saying, I hope you know you're taking food off my toddler's plate. Just some food for thought. I tell him to go F himself. Run into him and his wife a couple months later, comes to me, hands me $100 cash, says, sorry for how I acted. I was high on nose candy for most of that. You think you can get me a job again? I laugh and say no, I wasn't going to put my butt on the line for him after how he treated our company. Asks for the $100 back. Tell him sure, hand it back. Ask him if he has food for his baby. Wife looks confused. They didn't have a baby, just a way to get money out of concerned people. Ooh, and there's the nail in the D-bag coffin. I was ready to try a little forgive and forget with this guy. Sure, he has a few strikes against him, but hey, dealing with an addiction, stuff like that, I really wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but then the paying his debt but asking for it back and revealing he was lying about the kid? Yeah, sorry, guy. You kind of earned the treatment you got. Story 7. A friend of mine works at a construction recruitment agency and recently told me a great story. His colleague got a phone call in the office from a client, the foreman of a large construction site, who immediately began to scream at him to come to the site and collect a laborer from the agency who was on his first day working there. It transpired that this young, chavvy temp had left the tracked excavator he was supposed to be operating to find the foreman and demand a socket set to remove the excavator's seat, as he dropped his phone under it and couldn't reach it. The foreman told him to F off and get back to work and that he could try to retrieve his phone at the end of the day once he was off the clock. Phones weren't allowed on site anyway. After a shouting match, the laborer stormed off, climbed into the neighboring excavator, and used its bucket to rip the cab off his machine to get his phone. Needless to say, the agency took him off its books. Story 8. Couldn't figure out how to log into email with step-by-step directions on the first day. Needed step-by-step directions every day for everything on the computer. Me, day 3. Did you double-click Outlook icon? Him. Oh yeah, now what do I do? Me. Type in your password. Him. What's my password? Me. You picked your password on the first day. That's why it's called a password. Only you know it. Him. Oh yeah. Proceeds to sit there for 15 minutes doing nothing because he doesn't know his password. I'm usually pretty gentle when I fire someone. He wanted to argue he was computer literate during his termination meetings. You keep using that word. Story 9. I feel like right now I'm that new employee. Day 1, relative died, delayed my start by 2 days. Day 5, husband of relative died, was offered compassionate leave. Day 13, girlfriend fell down the stairs and needed to go to the hospital. Day 15, I had a pre-booked holiday, another day off. Day 16, girlfriend's passport stolen in another country. Missed our train home, weather prevented us traveling that entire day. Day 17, arrived 2 hours late after having to travel across Europe before work. Day 36, boiler explodes during the night and need to sit around for an emergency plumber who then takes all day to fix it. I really swear it's all the bad luck at once, but even I know it sounds so unrealistically far-fetched at this point. Honestly, I'm pretty sure the only reason they haven't fired you is they can probably see it's legit because I'm sure you seem pretty stressed after all that. Typically, if folks are faking that crap, you can start to see through it, but when folks are legit going through the ringer, it shows. Story 10. He antagonized every single female coworker. It was like his only way of communicating with anybody of the opposite sex was to be demeaning and constantly using facetious tones to undermine them. Luckily, these weren't the reserved gals he was used to at his private college. He learned this the hard way after making a joke about one of the senior members' lunch being too small and to eat a sandwich. She barked back, and he did not return the next day. Story 11. Ran an in-home senior care business. Hired a chick, and she got a sweet butt gig. 9 to 5, steady work, great easygoing family, and easy cared for elderly lady. All she had to do was wear scrubs, not tank tops and shorty shorts. That's it. 1 week in was when that changed. We also found out that she brought a catalog of stuff to sell to the person she was caring for. Ended up selling her like $500 worth of crap. Luckily, we were able to stop it in time. Only person we ever had to actually fire. Everyone else lost their client or just quit. Story 12. Asked me permission to use the bathroom. Every time. In spite of my protestations that he was an adult who I trusted to make his own decisions about going to the lav. He also sent me a weekly spreadsheet of all his breaks, potty and otherwise, lunches, and arrival and departure times. This is in no way required or the norm in our workplace. Finally, after multiple pleas from me, he stopped doing that. He was very smart and very skilled, but this was the first indication that he would otherwise be a lot of work. Honestly, if you wanted an easier way to fix the problem, either just don't respond or keep telling him, no. Eventually, he's either going to realize he should just go or he's going to have an accident, at which point you can just say, "Why didn't you just go to the bathroom?" Story 13. We hired a bench technician to do electronics repairs. The first job I asked his help with was to extend a COM cable. 3 conductors. Easy peasy. Cut the cable, splice the X amount of new wire, done. He comes back to me an hour later with the original cable cut in 2, then spliced back together, without adding anything to it. Instead of extending it, all he did was cut it and put it back together, and it took him an hour. Story 14. I was a lead developer for an organization's HR system using PeopleSoft. I hired a PhD computer science person from Stanford thinking I had just struck gold. After showing the good doctor our development system, the hire asks, "Why are you working with these toys? These are beneath us." I told that person that this was what we use and got rewarded with a derisive scoff. Fortunately, the person took another job at some think tank shortly after, so I didn't have to deal with that for long. Needless to say, I don't hire purely from educational credentials anymore. Story 15. I once worked with someone who was an absolute waste of space. My boss said he was going to promote him. I told him no, it's a bad idea. After 3 months of training, the guy became a manager, then on his first shift alone, stole all the cash from the day's sales. I wasn't even mad. I smiled when my boss told me. It shocks me just how often the worst people get hired into managerial positions. I've known so many managers who were caught stealing or abusing their position to the point where they were fired and often even prosecuted. The worst part is, they are always so obviously a bad choice. Really makes you question just how good the people in charge are at their jobs. Story 16. She stapled papers in the middle of the page, like as far as she could reach with the stapler. I never knew such a short story could make me so instantly angry. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.